The Mass Effect trilogy has a special place in my heart. I was a teenager, still in middle school when the first one came out, and in my mind it quickly became synonymous with next-gen gaming, marking the first time I ever got swept in by the hype. Needless to say, I played through every single entry as soon as they were released. Generally, my opinions fell in line with the mainstream at the time. I thought it was one of the best RPG series in gaming, a modern classic marred only by a single questionable character and a disappointing ending that caused so much fan backlash, BioWare felt the need to change it via a patch 2 months after release. A lot has happened since then. I grew up watching BioWare's downfall in real time as it struggled and failed time and again to recapture the magic of those 5 short years, making me wonder if that magic truly existed at all, or if my feelings on Mass Effect are just a byproduct of playing it at a young and impressionable age. Now, almost 20 years later, with the next and possibly last Mass Effect looming on the horizon, I decided it was finally time to find out by replaying through the entire trilogy in the form of the Mass Effect Legendary Edition. The most basic question to ask and answer in any review is whether or not the game is worth playing, which, as you see through this video, I have some very complicated feelings about, but when reviewing a remaster, there's a second question to ask. Assuming the game is worth playing, is the remaster truly an improvement over the original, or did the developers change too much and lose something important along the way? Thankfully, the second answer comes much more easily than the first, so let's take the easy way forward and start by looking at what the Legendary Edition has to offer when compared to the original trilogy. The Xbox 360 era was a tough time for PC gamers. Most publishers at the time suddenly got into their heads that PC gaming was dying and not worth investing into, leading to a console-first approach and underfunded, lackluster PC ports, and the Mass Effect trilogy was no exception. For example, the ports didn't even have controller support. Think of the irony, the Mass Effect series, which were specifically meant to work with a controller and marketed primarily to a console audience, did not have controller support on the PC. The developers decided it was better to spend time and money stripping it away rather than using that time and money to make it compatible with PC controllers. And adding insult to injury, the most popular controller on PC at the time was the Xbox 360 pad, so the exact same controller that worked just fine on the Xbox version of the game doesn't work at all on the PC port of Mass Effect. That's the kind of poorly supported, shoddy, minimum viable product kind of project the original trilogy was on PC. So when comparing the Legendary Edition against such a low bar, there's just no contest. It's objectively a much better PC port, with full controller support, ultra-wide resolutions, frame rates up to 240 FPS and HDR, plus a bunch of improvements to the textures, lighting engine and user interface. It's not perfect, the more realistic lighting can feel a little flat when compared to the original's darker, more saturated look. The dialogue scenes are all pillar boxed, which is really annoying on a series that involves so much talking, and they still neglected to add a field of view option, but even then those improvements add up to a much superior experience. I wouldn't stomach the default field of view, by the way, and opted to install the unofficial LE patches which, among other things, add an FOV option to the game, and I highly recommend you do the same. Playing on the original FOV with Shepard over in the entire left side of the screen just made me feel like I had lost an eye. It was terrible back then and it's still terrible now. Anyway, the improvements run deeper than just visuals. The Legendary Edition rebalances and updates the gameplay, especially in the first game which, as BioWare's first foray into third-person shooters, was rough even for the time, and integrates all of the bonus DLC equipment seamlessly into the main games rather than just dumping it all in your inventory from the start, which I always found detrimental to the early game balance. There's a photo mode, and as someone who loves to play on higher difficulties but doesn't often replay games, I was pleasantly surprised to see the Insanity difficulty was unlocked from the start, which wasn't the case for the originals. Finally, the story and dialogue seem largely untouched, which for such a story and dialogue heavy series is probably for the best. Now, you would probably achieve a similar experience by modding the hell out of the original trilogy with texture packs, gameplay mods and the like, but that takes a lot of extra effort. Plus, it's more expensive as buying the Legendary Edition, at least on PC, is cheaper than buying the originals. So for all these reasons, to me at least, this is a no-brainer. The original PC ports are terrible and not worth the trouble, so just save yourself the hassle and play the Legendary Edition instead. With that said, we're left with the far trickier question, which is whether or not the Mass Effect trilogy is even worth playing in the first place. To recap, when I finished playing the originals all those years ago, I have the opinion the Mass Effect trilogy was one of the best RPG series in gaming, but now, the longer I played, the more I realized that I only really liked the first game. The Mass Effect universe is a marvel of world building. It has this deep, elaborate setting full of different alien species and societies, interconnected throughout thousands of years of history, and most of it is introduced and taken into account on the first game's plot to an excellent effect. I'll explore this in more detail later on when we get to the spoiler part of the review, but for now, it's enough to say the second and third games throw away a lot of that backstory for the sake of set-piece action moments that instantly clash with the first game's established lore and tone. Imagine the Lord of the Rings trilogy if Tolkien only wrote the Fellowship of the Ring, then gave up and let George R.R. Martin write the rest. Let me be clear, this isn't me throwing shade at R.R. Martin's work, but no one would say his writing style is remotely similar to Tolkien's, and suddenly switching between the two would feel jarring at best and a misleading waste of potential at worst. Playing through Mass Effect 2 and seeing how they squander off the plot hooks from the first game, only for Mass Effect 3 to try and pick them up again, while also introducing a Nightwing self-insert fanfic for some baffling brain fart of a reason, not to mention all of the clumsy ways they try to create emotional payoffs to beloved characters at all costs, no matter how artificial they felt. I realized BioWare had lost their magic long before Mass Effect 3's ending. I still think the first Mass Effect is a modern classic and a game every RPG and science fiction fan should experience, but I just can't say the same for the other two. Don't get me wrong, there is some fun to be had in the sequels. Some of the characters and scenes are pretty good in a turn off your brain and enjoy the action sort of way, and Mass Effect 3's third-person shooter gameplay was really fun, especially in the Insanity difficulty. The movement and shooting feel great, all the different powers and combos feel impactful, there's a great variety of enemies, each with their own unique abilities and tactics, the combat encounters feel well designed with lots of opportunities for flanking and area denial, the AI for both friends and foes is great, leading everyone to use their powers effectively and seek better positions on the battlefield, and you have a lot of flexibility to customize everyone's build and weapons. But that's just not what I signed up for. BioWare used to be the gold standard of storytelling in games, one of the biggest, most accomplished Western RPG developers at a time when they were a dying breed. Good gameplay is a nice bonus, of course, but not worth sacrificing what made them great in the first place. Now, I've been overdoing the analogies to avoid spoiling the plot, but at the end of the day, it's much better to just lay it all down and be open about it, so from this point on, I'll show you some concrete examples of what I mean, so consider this your spoiler warning for the entire Mass Effect trilogy. If you don't want any, skip to the final chapter of this video, where I'll be wrapping up my thoughts in a spoiler-free manner. Mass Effect was a highly ambitious project. 3 epic science fiction RPGs spanning the entire galaxy, with the player as Commander Shepard, the man or woman, at the center of it all, their actions and choices rippling throughout the story, culminating in a unique ending that reflected each player's journey. And so, the first game's task was to set it all up. Establish the universe, characters and concepts that the sequel would rely on to develop the overarching plotline. BioWare went above and beyond, coming up with a complex, diverse galactic society, its own unique system of government, political infighting, and all sorts of historic baggage. Most of the details are stored away in the in-game codex, but they are reflected in every character, every interaction, and of course, in the main plot. It also makes good on the promise of valuing player choices and consequences by presenting numerous chances for players to influence the fate of the people around them, from small, inconsequential interactions with minor characters all the way to weighty, important decisions with far-reaching consequences. But what makes the first Mass Effect so great in my view is the tone. The first game has a strong cosmic horror undercurrent. All of the amazing, ultra-advanced technology that forms the cornerstone of galactic society is based off of data salvaged from ancient ruins left by a long-dead civilization. Their critical infrastructure, mass relays which allow for faster-than-light travel, and the Citadel, a massive space station that serves as the Council's center of government, are some of such ruins built in eons past and later discovered by their current occupants. For all their purported accomplishments and grandeur, the Council races are just squatters, living the ruins of their predecessors, playing with the remnants of technology they barely understand. Saren as the main villain completes this Lovecraftian setting. He's a ruthless, highly capable agent, sworn to protect the galaxy at all costs, who learns that those ruins were actually left on purpose by an ancient, enigmatic race of massive, spacefaring robots known only as the Reapers, to direct organic technological evolution down a predictable path that would leave them vulnerable for harvest at the end of each galactic cycle. Broken by this realization and brainwashed into believing their only hope for survival was operating with the Reapers, Saren acts not only as a powerful initial threat, but also as a tragic foil to the player, who often finds himself walking down this exact same path. I should mention though that I had some severe problems with how Sovereign, Saren's master who acts as a vanguard for the Reaper invasion, sounds less like an unknowable, enigmatic alien entity and more like an adult's impression of an edgy 14-year-old. I mean, listen to this self-aggrandizing speech.
I do not think this is a VI.
There is a realm of existence so far beyond your own, you cannot even imagine it. I am beyond your comprehension. I am sovereign.
There's a very important rule for writing and life in general. If you have to tell other people how great you aren't as great as you think. But other than that, the game is full of deep, personal stories that tie into the setting and provide windows into the darker aspects of galactic life. Aiden struggles as one of the first humans to develop biotic powers. Ashley's deeply rooted xenophobia against aliens as a result of being the granddaughter of the only human commander to ever surrender to an alien invasion. Rex's despair at seeing his people waste away in pointless, misdirected violence rather than rebuild from the ashes of their downfall, and that's just a handful of examples. There's so much more to experience, and the final choices of the first game leave us with a satisfying ending and the promise of what's to come. Then, Mass Effect 2 spends the first hour of gameplay systematically throwing it all away in favor of a glorified side quest. Now, it's important to clarify here that I'm not implying the Mass Effect 2 writing team was in any way incompetent. In fact, as far as I know, every one of the original Mass Effect writers also worked on Mass Effect 2, and they certainly didn't suddenly forget how to do their jobs. Rather, I think Mass Effect 2 is the result of the development team finally realizing just what it meant to fulfill the promise of allowing player choices to ripple through and affect the entire trilogy. Specifically, how expensive it would be to write, voice act, and animate alternate dialogue scenes that reflected the choices made by players in the first game. For example, let's look at the state of the first game's original 6 companions. Ashley, Aiden, and Rex all end die in Vermeer. Liara cannot die, but she's a possible romantic partner of the 6. Only Garrus and Tali have relatively fixed paths throughout the first game. And precisely for that reason, only Garrus and Tali may return as companions, while the writers came up with excuses to sideline everyone else, rather than spending money on alternate scenes only a small fraction of the player base would ever experience. The same happens with the Council. Players can choose to save or doom the original Council and later choose between Captain Anderson or Udina as the first human Councilor. In practical terms, this meant any interactions with the Council in Mass Effect 2 would require developers to make at least 4 different versions, accounting for each possible combination of these 2 choices. The solution? Make a plan used why the council doesn't want to involve themselves with Shepard anymore and introduce a new supervisor type character to replace them in the form of the Elusive Man. This attitude permeates the entirety of Mass Effect 2 and, I'll repeat, it's done by necessity rather than because it would make for a good story. The entire plot of chasing the electors while working for a human paramilitary group that ends right where it started is the gaming equivalent of a filler season meant to limit player choices before they started compounding into an unmanageable, expensive mess. BioWare simply promised too much, and Mass Effect 2 was a necessary sacrifice to pave the way for Mass Effect 3. Of course, there are some brief flashes of brilliance here and there. Mass Effect 2 introduced the concept of loyalty missions, which allowed them to showcase and develop each companion character in ways that the first Mass Effect never would. Tali's mission especially features a courtroom drama where she's accused of treason and learns the horrific truth of her father's scientific experiments, and is the highest point of the game for me. Mordin Solus is nothing short of awesome also, and Garrus finally comes into his own, so it's not a complete wash, but these are all overshadowed by the complete waste of time that is chasing the electors and the Reaper Master, Harbinger. You see, in the first game, we only briefly meet Sovereign, which works for the best, allowing him to spend most of the game as this unfathomable shadow lurking in the horizon. Instead, most of our interactions focus on Saren, a mortal just like us. Well, in Mass Effect 2, the developers decided it would be a good idea to have Harbinger constantly interact with the player. Every time you are fighting against his elector minions, he assumes direct control of one of them and tries to kill you. He taunts you constantly and, of course, ends up losing every time, only to take over a new minion and try again. And he is just as much of a self-aggrandizing edgelord as Sovereign was. Worse, you eventually find out Harbinger's whole goal was to lead his elector minions into building a human-based Reaper, thus revealing Reapers to be just overrun sludge vats. Never meet your Lovecraftian abominations, people. They say it will drive you mad, but in reality, it's only gonna lead you to disappointment. Mass Effect 2 is also where the series starts shifting to a more movie-like, set-piece focused style that, while not necessarily better or worse than the deep, lore-first approach of the original, presaged the absolute launch show that we witnessed in Mass Effect 3. Some scenes feel forced, as if the writers really wanted to add those cool elements to the story, but wouldn't really integrate them into the rest of the game. There's a bunch of examples I could mention, but in the interest of time, I'll focus on just one: Samara. Conceptually, Samara is a great character. She's an Azari Justiciar, pretty much a mix of a paladin from D&D with a romanticized version of the samurai and a dash of Robocop. She travels Azari space, fighting injustice according to the ancient Justiciar Code, which often leads her to kill everyone she deems unjust. Understandably, this makes even her fellow Azari nervous to have her around, as they never know what might trigger yet another killing spree. The mission to recruit Samara is all about her ode. She's straight outside Azari space in pursuit of a dangerous criminal arriving on Ilion, an outwardly rich and respectable world that is rotten to the core, to the point even slavery is legal. For obvious reasons, the arrival of a Justiciar makes everyone worried, and the local police constable is ordered to take her into custody before anything happens. But there's a snag. While Samara's ode compels her to collaborate with local authorities for one day, once that day is over, that very same ode forces her to continue her investigation, killing anyone who tries to stop her. Your arrival offers a timely way to prevent this bloodbath. Samara knows her target has already fled Ilion and only needs to find out her next destination. In exchange for finding this out for her, she agrees to live peacefully and even join your fight against the electors. There's so much potential in that setup. Seeing Samara interpret the universe outside Azari space through the lens of her ode, having her black and white worldview clash against the various shades of grey, having to finagle your way around the ode to stop her from acting rashly or even turning against you, the possibilities are endless. But then, once she joins you, she immediately pledges herself to your command in a way that lifts any and all of the old restrictions for as long as she's part of her crew, making it completely irrelevant for the rest of the game. It's like one of the writers had this amazing idea. It didn't test well with EA's focus group, and they were forced to neuter any and all gameplay ramifications for fear of making players frustrated by the consequences of their own actions. And this coming from the same team that only a couple of years earlier was responsible for this amazing moment in Vermeer where Rex turned against you in the hopes of securing a future for his species. On the other hand, the suicide mission was pretty cool. Trying to complete it without a guide, fully aware that a wrong choice would lead to multiple characters dying, made for a genuinely exciting moment, even though I had the advantage of kinda remembering how you're supposed to do it from my first playthrough all these years ago. And yet, just like the possible deaths in Mass Effect 1, I knew most of these survivors would be sidelined on the next game for the same reason Ashley, Aiden and Rex had been sidelined in Mass Effect 2. It's a bittersweet feeling knowing that when a character survives in Mass Effect, they are inevitably condemned to a limbo state, never allowed to thrive again because of design and budgetary constraints. This is probably the biggest weakness of a project like the Mass Effect trilogy and the biggest argument against sequels to choice-heavy games. Then we move to Mass Effect 3, a mixed bag if there ever was one. On the one hand, the writers were finally free to make good on all those promises of choice and consequence since they didn't have to worry about what came after, and for their credit, they did a really good job tying all the previous game's choices together. Mass Effect 3 is full of little cameos, side missions and alternate scenes that may or may not happen according to your actions in the previous games. In that respect, Mass Effect 3 is what Mass Effect 2 should have been all along. On the other hand, the main story loses any pretense of hard sci-fi mystery, veering all the way into nonsensical rule of oh hurrah action film. The player is back to working for the human military and the council, while the elusive man becomes relegated to a cartoonishly evil villain role. The Reapers attack Earth first, supposedly because seeing Earth on fire would be more relatable to a player than seeing them attack the Citadel or something. A bunch of emotional scenes are rolled into the plot, even if they don't make any sense, and, of course, he shows up. This living meme edgelord, Nightwing lookalike with a love for more ninja antics, stupid one-liners, and trying to even when it makes him fail at his job, and everyone tells you that trust me bro, he's actually really dangerous and ruthlessly effective if only you could see what he gets up to when nobody's looking. I am, of course, talking about Eileen. Eileen is the elusive man's Shepard replacement, a cybernetically enhanced soldier and assassin loyal only to him, to be sent on highly sensitive missions of vital importance to his plans. You first run into Eileen as he's trying to assassinate the Salarian Counselor for reasons. Eileen drops down from the ceiling and slowly walks towards him, wasting precious time trying to intimidate his target rather than just putting a bullet in his brain and calling it a day. Shepard eventually regains their senses, bursting into the scene, at which point Eileen still neglects to kill the counselor, allowing him just enough time to reveal to Shepard a vital bit of information with the potential of stopping the elusive man's plans of taking over the Citadel. In this part, the story diverges according to some of your previous decisions, and the Salarian counselor may or may not end up saved by a friend. Regardless, Eileen jumps into a flying car and goes off to assassinate the other counselors who are trying to flee the Citadel. There's a chase scene that functions as a way for him to show off some more, a combat section, and when all said and done, he flees, having failed to assassinate anyone else. And from that point on, he just keeps showing up time and again with his fancy moves and plot armor until you finally get the chance to kill him in the stupidest way possible. You defeat him in battle, only for him to struggle back to his feet, while everyone tries very hard not to notice all of the loud panting and grunting. He slowly walks up to Shepard's back and tries to stab them with his little ninja sword. You then get the option to break it with the back of your hand, and as you do, an achievement pops up: Executioner. The description shows just how deluded BioWare's developers were in regard to Island's importance. It just says, defeat an old adversary. Dude, please. You keep treating him like a long-time rival, but the man showed up halfway through the last game with no foreshadowing and build-up. All his on-camera successes are contrived through a mix of cutscene incompetence and plot armor, and his only claim to rivalry comes from holding a job that used to be Shepard's. Saren was a rival. Island was just an overblown tryhard. And here's the thing. Island might be the most obvious manifestation of that rule of trampling all over common sense for the sake of forcing emotional payoffs, but it's far from the only one. More than sacrifice to ear the Genophage makes for a powerful moment, but the writers had to twist themselves every which way to contrive a scenario where that sacrifice would be necessary. Samara's side mission is an emotional tale of a mother torn between her duty, which would require her to murder her last daughter in cold blood, and her love for said daughter, which drives her to suicide, except if you choose to interrupt Samara before she shoots herself in the head, her daughter promises to behave, and that somehow clears up everything. Turns out all you needed to satisfy Samara's ode was a pinky promise. I can feel 1,000 criminals watching from the afterlife collectively facepalming at the realization. And that pattern keeps repeating all the way up to the climax of the story, where the Reapers decide to move the Citadel to the skies of London for the vague reason of keeping it fortified against the human-led resistance, when they would have just arted it away into dark space instead. But no, the marketing department promised players we would be taking back Earth, so of course the climax had to happen in an iconic Earth city. The final dialogue scene of the game puts the final nail on Mass Effect's Lovecraftian themes. Shepard meets the Star Child, a virtual construct that lives in the Citadel and controls the Reapers, and gets to ask all those burning questions that humanity wasn't ever meant to know. Usually, in Lovecraftian stories, that kind of knowledge can drive a sane man mad. In Mass Effect, the knowledge drove a bunch of gamers mad.
Solution to what? Chaos.
You see, every galactic cycle, a number of different species develop spacefaring technology and spread throughout the galaxy. Inevitably, at least one of those species has the bright idea of developing synthetic life. You know, AI-powered robots. From then, it's just a matter of time until those robots rebel against their masters and enter into conflict with the galaxy at large, at which point they just keep fighting until they kill everyone else and take over. The Reapers are a solution to that. A race of synthetic beings created to prevent AI from killing everyone by swooping in every once in a while and killing only everyone who's past a certain level of technological development. They then harvest off that biomass and build new Reapers off of their biosludge, which they believe works as a way to preserve those species forever. That's it. Once you strip off the fancy, cryptic, pseudo-logical flourishes, that's what remains. The Reapers are robots that kill everyone to stop them from making robots that will end up killing everyone. But the worst part is, it would have worked. If only BioWare had either the self-awareness or the courage to play up the absurdity of it all, with the edgy Reapers and the nonsense of Star Child, making them out to be the butt of one of the universe's greatest mistakes. Seriously, I can only imagine how much of a field day someone like Yoko Taro would have with that concept. Shepard finding out all of her suffering, the years of fighting off the Reaper's minions, knowing every hard-fought victory would only delay the inevitable, but doing it anyway in the hopes of buying just enough time for the galaxy to better prepare for their invasion. Enduring the humiliation of being turned away by the Council, treated like a delusional person and being driven into the elusive man's arms, the only man willing to believe her, having her name dragged through the mud as a terrorist sympathizer, watching hundreds of thousands of innocents die, many of them by her own hand, her friends and colleagues meeting painful, horrifying deaths right before her eyes, one after another, only to land in a jail cell as recognition for her service. Earth, Palaven, Tessia, and so many more, bathed in fire, their inhabitants systematically turned into husks or worse, billions of lives lost, all for the sake of a prehistoric bit of flawed circular logic. Now, this realization would drive anyone mad, and I would have loved to see it. But no, the writers instead decided to play it safe and gaslight everyone into believing it all made sense. Shepard just accepts everything on face value, and we're expected to do the same. And that's without even mentioning the Leviathan DLC, released later as a way of shedding some light on who created the Reapers in the first place. It starts off interesting enough, as you track down some sort of primordial creature powerful enough to destroy a Reaper by itself, but it ends in the same note as every other Reaper encounter in the series. The edginess, the self-aggrandizing speeches, the nonsensical cryptic babble. Honestly, it felt like the developers were aware of the criticism regarding the Reapers and chose to double down on it rather than finding another way. In short, this is the sad, disappointing culmination of a franchise that peaked too early. But there's one piece of DLC that I just loved, and I was saving it because I wanted to end this video on a somewhat positive note. Mass Effect 3 Omega. The Omega DLC revisits Mass Effect 2's main hub area, the Omega Space Station, an anarchic haven of pirates and mercenaries ruled by the ruthless Azari Arya Tilo. In the DLC, Arya and her people were driven out of Omega by the Elusive Man's top strategist, and she asked Shepard for help. What follows is a short string of self-contained missions where Shepard and Arya infiltrate the station along with a bunch of Arya's mercenary troops, meet her old friend and local gang leader Nyreen, and work together to overthrow Oleg. This DLC does a wonderful job of playing up to Mass Effect 3's strengths while restoring some of the narrative depth so many of the main story missions are sorely lacking. For starters, it features constant combat in a variety of environments against a bunch of different enemies, and Arya's biotic powers are unique, flashy and powerful, making for a nice change when compared to the other actors' more subdued combat styles. The story is short and to the point, but being a self-contained DLC allows for a surprising number of choices and consequences which influence whether or not Arya ends up being merciful to Oleg as he was to her, or brutally murders him for having the gall to humiliate her. In a way, the Omega DLC was the last best ember of brilliance to leap out of the Mass Effect development team, and rather than fuming at the ending, I prefer to treasure that memory as the last hurrah of a Mass Effect that was before it became the Mass Effect that is. And so, to finish this little video of mine, I'd like to conclude by saying that, yeah, turns out Mass Effect 1 was the only great RPG of the bunch. And EA probably agrees with me, as they currently market Mass Effect as an action adventure game series instead. It's definitely worth playing it if you're a fan of sci-fi, especially since even 20 years later, there are precious few Western RPG studios dedicated to spacefaring RPGs, and even fewer that hit that same Lovecraftian tone of hopelessly fighting against the unending, inscrutable horrors of the void. I mean, off the top of my head, I can only really think of Rogue Trader. Regarding Mass Effect 2, well, I honestly recommend skipping it or maybe playing through it on easy mode just to experience the loyalty missions. It used to represent a substantial improvement in graphical quality and gameplay when compared to the first game, but the Legendary Edition all but eliminated that gap, and I just can't recommend it for the story. As for Mass Effect 3, it's the only entry that I can recommend on the basis of having a fun, fast-paced gameplay loop, so if you enjoy third-person shooters, give it a try, but don't expect the story to be any good. With that said, as disappointed as I was with the sequels, my love for the first game grew in equal measure. Knowing what a precious lightning in a bottle moment it was, and how unlikely we are to ever see anything like it, makes me treasure it all the more. Despite all the gameplay junk and a couple of missteps, I still think the original Mass Effect is a modern classic, and that's enough for me. And that is also enough for this video. I hope you enjoyed my little diatribe on the Mass Effect Legendary Edition, and if you've made it this far, I'm truly grateful for your attention. As always, feedback is appreciated. See you in the next video, bye bye!